Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It is Tuesday, the 24th of July, 2012. And Michael, a guy with the last name Hargadon should never have trouble. On, but I'm going to turn mine off now, so in case somebody's having bandwidth issues, then Michael's will come through clearly. Thanks to Mighty Bell and Blackboard and Education. Coming up as part of those Web 2.0 Labs projects, the Learning 2.0 conference, which is going to be the week of August 20th. Part of Connected Educators Month. That should be a lot of fun. It's one of our free virtual conferences. Information should be posted this week. Connected Educator Month does start the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of August, the opening kickoff, for which I have responsibility. It's really exciting. Stay tuned. You'll get an email from me or check the blog about what's happening there. We have 3 days of great panels and keynote speakers. The Future of Libraries Conference comes up on October 3rd through 5th, and the Global Education Conference. The mothership of our virtual conference is 5 days, 24 hours a day, hundreds of sessions. That's November 12th to the 16th. Coming up on the Future of Education, we've had to reschedule 2 of our shows. So Elliot Washer is going to be rescheduled, as well as John Idelson. On the 31st of July, David Dubelbeis is going to talk about social networking for professional development. He and I have been running Ning networks for about 5 years, and it should be a really fun conversation together. Lee Rainey from Pew will talk about his new book, Network, the New Social Operating System. Roger Schenck comes back on to talk about teaching minds and cognitive science. Paula Blickstein from Stanford on Fab Labs. Anyway, lots there. Some of that is new if you're paying attention and you're interested in the new. The ones in November, Yale Wishnick on his book, Moving from a Culture of Dependency to a Culture of Success, should have great implications for schools. We're going to talk about flipping the classroom with your own videos on the 7th of November. And Kieran Sethi, I'm not trying to say your name, who did a great TED video on teaching kids to take charge, is going to come on November 20th. Anyway, lots there, hopefully something that will be of interest to you. If you've missed any of the shows, they are all recorded and up in full Blackboard Collaborate versions and MP3 formats. Not listed there was the most recent show, and I apologize for that. That would have been Marcia Connor on social learning. Anyway, that was really fun, but that is up there, although it's not listed at the top of that list. So this is when you get a chance to let us know where you're participating from. To the left of the whiteboard, you should see some icons now. You're looking for the star icon, and it's the second one down. Click on it twice, and then click on the map. Feel free to shout out in the chat where you're participating from, as well as the time or the temperature. Wherever that is, we're sure glad to have you participating. This is an earlier time of the day than usual, but it is summer. You can never tell who's going to be here in the summer, thanks to Australia. And if you're listening to the recording, we sure appreciate your taking the time to do so. So Michael, I'm a little worried that you get asked for to speak or to be interviewed so often that makes it hard for you to do your job, your actual work. But maybe that's a good thing that you've gotten this much publicity. Is it a funny balance?
Yes and no. I think, we do get asked for a lot of interviews, and we've spoken at a lot of places, and sometimes there'll be other people from our team, but it's really amazing to see so many people are open to hearing our story and hearing about the journey that we've been on and where we're going. So it hasn't been too much of a distraction, but it's been pretty good so far.
So we've created a Mighty Bell space for people to collect resources around this. I was almost tempted to put in this space and I'll put the link in the chat there, meetup.com and Maker Faire, because I feel like there are direct connections to these two kinds of programs. But if you're interested in following up on the interview with Michael afterwards, you're welcome to add resources and the like and continue to chat there. But for right now, I'm going to go back to the actual Skillshare site. Okay, so would you give us a sense of what Skillshare does?
Yeah, so the easiest explanation is Skillshare is a marketplace for classes. So the basic idea is we truly believe that anyone can become a teacher and every single person should become a lifelong student, and every address can turn into a classroom. So the original idea was to turn New York City into a massive campus where we could learn from all of our colleagues and neighbors and learn the skills that we actually wanted to learn. And I think if we could sum it up as like, what's the big difference between Skillshare and traditional education? I think we're very student-driven, meaning everything is very bottom-up and everything's democratized. And we focus a lot on what students actually want to learn, whether that's something as simple as learning how to cook fried chicken. So a couple of weeks ago, I took a class on making Southern fried chicken, which was amazing, all the way to, I sit on the other side and I teach a class on startups and starting your own company. And I've taught that to a little over 100 students here in New York. So it really spans the gamut, and what we're seeing is a lot of people get really passionate about the things they're learning and teaching, which is one of the unique traits of Skillshare and the community that's in it.
So I like the language that you use, especially you use the word passion a lot. It feels to me that there is at core kind of a belief in the potential and value of every individual. That's my language, but would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when we first started Skillshare, and we first started thinking about the idea a couple of years ago, I think one of the biggest holes, or one of the biggest reasons people said it would not succeed was because nobody wanted to learn after they graduated from school. And it was really hard to become a teacher. It was, probably one of the biggest reasons, the education system isn't as great as it could be, because we don't have a lot of great teachers. And we had a fundamental belief that, learning and education has been around since the beginning of time. It's basically part of being a human being on this planet. It's part of, the community, just part of who you are. And people have always taught each other skills and shared and passed knowledge from generation to generation. With that as our initial belief, we decided to see if we could test that and just get people to teach whatever they wanted to other people, and it's been working.
So I really like that, and I think that that resonates with a lot of people who participate in the conversations that I'm in. But one thing I'm worried about is that that there's a secondary narrative there that I'm not sure is necessarily a fair one, which is that we don't have many good teachers. What was your own educational experience like? And is it the case that you feel like the teachers weren't good, or that the system didn't meet your expectations? Or how would you, in a more nuanced way, kind of define the need for disruption?
Yeah, I think that was the feedback that we received when we were telling people about the idea. I totally do not agree with the fact that there aren't great teachers or good teachers in the world. That was just kind of, when we told people about Skillshare, that they would always say it wouldn't work because of this or that, and those were the maybe two reasons. As far as my personal experience, it was very unique and different. So, like everyone else, from a young age, my parents have always encouraged me to go to college. I mean, it was probably one of that major milestone all the way up until I was 18 that I really focused on. So when I was younger, my parents moved. I grew up in Seoul, and my parents moved us, our family, from South Korea to Virginia just so that we could get an education in the U.S. So my entire life, from middle school to high school to studying nonstop for the SATs, participating in as many extracurricular activities as possible. And then finally getting to college, I thought was a massive, it was a major milestone in my life. So I got into the University of Virginia for undergrad. It was a great experience. I learned a lot. It's the first, much like everyone else going to higher education or college, it was the first time I actually, left the nest, if you would say. But I felt like I was learning a lot of these skills and these things that put me on a path I didn't want to go down. So when I was at the University of Virginia, I majored in economics and basically got a business degree. And one really unique thing happened is, my senior year, they did a lot of interviewing through Monster.com, so you were allowed to apply to as many companies as you want and interview. One of them happened to be an advertising agency. I interviewed there, and I just thought it was so amazing that you could get a job doing something creative. Because at that time in my life, I didn't really know you could do anything outside of the traditional jobs that most students were getting. So when I look at my personal educational experience, I felt UVA was great and it was very traditional. But the education I got when I got into grad school, which is a business, so taking a step back, I decided to pursue something in creativity, and my sister at the time went to a school in Virginia called Virginia Commonwealth University. And they had a grad school which had a great advertising program. So I decided to apply, and I ended up getting in. And for me, I always look at those two moments in my life as a very pivotal moment. So undergrad, great college experience, really loved it, really enjoyed it, but I really felt that the education I got at VCU is still to this date the best education I've ever received in my entire life. And the reason I say that is because it was very non-traditional. So we never had tests, we never had quizzes, I never bought a textbook. Our teachers barely lectured. A lot of it was based on project-based learning within groups with other people, and I really learned a lot by doing. And I felt that I learned all these hard and soft skills that I still use today, and I still would say that Skillshare would not exist if it wasn't for that education. And for me, that's when I kind of really realized there's a big difference between education and learning. Because I felt like that, what happened at UVA was I got an education, meaning I had to pick a couple of things that I wanted to major in, and I majored in those. And I felt like at VCU, I learned a lot of these new skills that I wanted to learn. It was very tailored around my skills and my interests. So for me, that was a massive wake-up call. And I think that really paved the way as far as thinking about education. How can it be so different in such a similar way, and figuring out why can't I learn in this way and why do I have to learn that way? And that really paved the way for the next 10 years of thinking about what was wrong with the educational system, and if I had to create something, what would that look like?
So I tend to have an inherent skepticism of software solving human problems, but sort of intriguingly, more and more the web as a social vehicle does seem to do that. And so you were inspired by Ken Robinson, as I recall, saying, hey, if you know how to do this kind of programming, go out and disrupt education. I guess my question would be, first the comment would be, part of what makes Skillshare so uniquely interesting to me is the fact that it would be very difficult to do this. Not impossible, but difficult to do without the technology. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, are we pinning too many hopes on technology trying to solve what is much more of a human issue? I mean, you have a great teacher you refer back to. How much of our current situation really relates to teachers impacting students versus technology as a solution?
Yeah, that's a question that I personally think about a lot. I think everyone in our company and our team thinks about that constantly and nonstop as well. Clayton Christensen, the famous academic and writer and author, writes a lot about this as well. And when you read the stuff he writes about innovation, specifically within the education world, I think a lot of people mistake technology for innovation. And what he writes about a lot is that most people are innovating on top of a model that's already broken or not working. And I think when I think about what could the future look like and how does technology come into play, I think it's a mixture of all those different factors. I think it would be great if we could meet people locally, but we could also learn online. And the more we think about it as a company, I really do believe in the hybrid or blended model of learning as probably the future of education. Obviously we're very biased and we really believe in communities and groups of people learning together. And we've seen the effects of that locally here in New York City. So we launched Skillshare about a year ago, last April. We're starting to see students, taking classes together. We're starting to see students converting into teachers. We're starting to see some students progressing within certain skill sets with other people. I don't think it's a one solution is going to fix everything. I think it's probably a combination of many different things.
I really appreciate your humility and your thoughtfulness in answering. In one of the videos that I watched, you said, that you don't think you're going to be expert on teaching or on change. And I thought that was a very sort of thoughtful way to represent yourself. Have you thought about badges? And there's a big movement now for sort of the authentication or representation of learning. How have you at Skillshare approached that?
Yeah, so we've always thought about where does gaming and badges come into play? And when we first started Skillshare, we had pretty much like a 3 or 4 step process of how we wanted to build out our company and in what order and how were we going to think about education. And the first step of that was let's focus on the offline components of Skillshare, really build this local marketplace so that people can teach each other in their life. Because at the end of the day, those are the magical things that happen within learning. Learning with other people, meeting people that have a shared interest and passion as yourself. I'm actually interacting with the teacher and other students. That's probably the other half of education that a lot of people forget. I know you mentioned earlier Meetup and other companies like that, and I think those unique things is what makes companies like Skillshare and Meetup very special. And if we go through the steps, I think one of the last things that really completes our puzzle is thinking about the accreditation component. The reason we haven't done badges yet is because we didn't really want to introduce anything gaming to the community yet. And we were really thinking about how does that intersect with attaching some value into what you learn. And to be completely honest and frank, I don't think we've really cracked it or really figured it out enough for us to build anything towards that. The one thing we do talk about a lot internally and externally is there are great companies and great brands out there, and for example, the example we always use internally when we start thinking about what the future could look like is, Apple is a great brand. Their industrial designers is probably the best in the world. What would it look like if Jonathan Ives at Apple taught a class in industrial design? And knowing that a lot of the things he would teach would not even be out in the world yet, or would be so new and so innovative that their company is the one leading the forefront of that. Imagine if 20 or 30 or 50 or 500 or 5,000 people around the world enrolled in that and they received a badge or some type of accreditation. Would that be valuable in the world? And I think our answer is yes. But how does that work and what does that look like? I don't think we've really figured that out yet. But I don't think, to answer, this is a long answer to your question, but I think we think less about badges and we think more about value. It's kind of how we're approaching it.
I'm actually kind of glad that you're not doing the badging yet. I'm highly skeptical of the value of an even more complex external measurement system. I think part of what's so brilliant about the democratic aspect of what you do is, first, it's at a very core level, anybody can participate. Mm-hmm. But second, the measure of what you learn is what you are able to do.
Yes.
Right. So.
Yeah, and that's something we talk a lot about internally, and actually there's a lot of things coming out within the Skillshare platform and community over the next year that really, really enforces and reinforces that. One thing we talk a lot about, and I'm sure you've heard it throughout probably everyone you've interviewed or researched, is the concept of learning by doing. And that's really the experience I had in my grad school education. And I do think, there's two things I always think about, like how do you actually prove that you master a skill or you actually know the skill? And one is actually making the thing or creating the thing that you're supposed to make. So if you are applying for a job and you're, a programmer, I think a lot of people are using GitHub, which is a website that allows you to upload your code so other people can view it as well. I think that speaks volumes about, whether you pass the test or not. I think the second thing is it's at its core, it's just so simple, but I think it's when you actually teach someone it. And I know there's a lot of people that are probably listening in that are teachers. You guys probably know that teaching something that you understand to someone that doesn't understand it is one of the hardest things you ever have to do. And I think when someone can actually pass their skills and knowledge to another group of students is when you've actually really mastered the skill or understood it enough to teach someone. And I think, once that cycle happens, I think that could become very, very amazing and remarkable for the world.
So there have been some great comments in the chat. There's a question, if you're having trouble seeing all of the chat, which is usually the case in that small box, you can actually grab the top of the chat section, hold the mouse down, and pull it out and make it larger. And there was a question about, from Monica, if you had read Doc Searle's Intention Economy. I'm not familiar. I've interviewed Doc, but I'm not familiar with that particular reference. Are you familiar with it?
No, I'm not.
So Monica, I think the answer is no. But feel free to add some chat there. When we get to Q&A, you can take the mic. So one of the first things that occurred to me was, so not only do I sort of feel like it's important to learn to represent what you can actually do versus an external badge, but it also feels like part of what Skillshare is doing is it's helping people build up that personal brand or personal value to others. So how does that work in Skillshare? What kind of a feedback loop is there for people becoming known for what they do?
Yeah, when we started Skillshare, we really, you'll hear this word a lot, we really thought about the community from the beginning. I think that just came from, Malcolm is a co-founder, that just came from our background, not in education per se. I mean, I'm not a trained teacher, I'm not an expert in education. I think we just brought a lot of what works on the internet and applied it to Skillshare. And one thing that we did from the beginning is we always wanted to provide and integrate constructive feedback into the community so that teachers can improve over time. So we always talk about, if Zappos is about customer service, Skillshare really exists on this planet to encourage teaching and teach teachers how to teach. So the community works just like it would on Etsy or eBay or Airbnb. When teachers over time get endorsements from students, so these are public testimonials. So for example, one of our top teachers, Avi, who last month made $25,000 teaching in New York. We'll get testimonies from the students saying, great class, really enjoy teaching them. But also within the feedback loop, we ask the question of how can he improve as a teacher? So a lot of students will, leave a lot of feedback for the teacher. And it's a private message, and over time the teachers read these and they start incorporating that into the second or the third or the fifth or the 10th time they teach. And over the past year, we've started seeing a lot of different teaching models that the teachers have applied based on the feedback they receive from their students, and it's been really amazing. And that's kind of how we, work with the feedback loops within Skillshare.
I wouldn't go to a restaurant without actually checking the reviews now for the food. That doesn't feel very harsh, but when we bring that to education, people often respond feeling as though this is scary and it makes teachers nervous. But it does feel like this is somewhat inevitable, right, in that those who are open to getting that feedback and improving are more likely to actually accomplish what they would like to accomplish.
Yes, and I think that the way we designed even the product and the community, it's really positive. I don't think, I think this is true for any website. If it's anonymous feedback, I think people are going to be really mean and brutal. But if it comes from a very specific person that you met in real life, I don't think people, I read a lot of them, and none of them are really that negative. I think most people are scared of teaching because they don't know what to teach. Or they feel like they don't have anything to teach, which I don't think is true. I think everyone has something that they can share with other people. I think a lot of people are just scared of also public speaking as well, and I think that is a huge fear. And what we're starting to see in New York is a lot of people are applying the Khan Academy model to teaching here. So they spend less time lecturing in class and more time like workshopping or learning by doing. So, for example, the programming class, after class, I know some of the teachers assign Code Academy exercises, or they'll assign videos to watch before class, but in class they're actually coding together. And I know a lot of the students meet in study groups do that as well. So we're starting to see like the community start shaping the way they want to learn, and that starts getting replicated from other teachers, and we're starting to see the Skillshare community kind of break away from how they've been traditionally taught, which is so fascinating to see firsthand.
It feels to me that Skillshare really lives and supports the long tail. All of the things that previously, would have been hard to find or difficult. Do you feel as though this is a harbinger of a larger economy that we're going to see in that long tail?
I think we looked at it more from a different aspect. It's, why can't you learn what you want to learn, whatever that is? I think if you look at what most people learn in traditional education, which is math, sciences, foreign language, those are fine. I think people need to learn those anyway. But if you really ask them, well, what are you curious about? What are you passionate about? I think you'll get such varying answers. And the line that we always use is, we believe that everyone is born with curiosity because curiosity is the compass that leads people to their individual passions. And I think if people could work every day on doing something, whether it's a job or a hobby that they're extremely passionate about, I think that leads to creativity, innovation, happiness, like all those warm, fuzzy feelings that you read about that people don't really associate with education. And I think we're starting to see that already within the Skillshare community.
So as you're talking about that, I'm remembering that my wife and I taught parenting classes years ago. We found a book we really liked, actually took a class to become facilitators, and then held these local classes. I'm trying to think of where this kind of activity has happened previously. Was it community centers, community colleges? Are you finding overlap with places where this kind of teaching has been done before?
Yes, so Skillshare is not a new concept. Nor, it's, when we launched it, I think we were probably one of the first companies on the internet that really embraced education and learning on a different, as most companies on the web. And, looking around, I think this has always existed. I think, to give you like a really quick history of actually how this idea came about, in the summer of 2010, I played in this massive poker tournament called the World Series of Poker. So I've been a poker player for over half of my life. It's just been an interest of mine. I'm a huge gamer, and I felt like it's one of the the most complex games you can play. I decided to donate 100% of my winnings to charity. One of the charities being a charter school in New Orleans I volunteered at. And there was a lot of professional poker players that I heard about the story, so they decided to kind of coach me and teach me everything they knew to increase my odds of winning. So long story short, we ended up raising a little over 125 grand. The interesting part of the story is when I got back to New York, all my friends asked me to teach them everything that I learned. So I went and created an event, loaded up Eventbrite and put together, essentially became the first Skillshare class. I think for us, that was kind of the aha moment of, why doesn't this exist on the internet? But when we started researching it, we just realized that even the word Skillshare has been around for 30, 40, 50 years. The idea of people teaching each other has been around forever. I think, what we did is we just made it very, very easy to do it through the internet. And we created a website and an entire company dedicated to lifelong learners and people that are passionate about the skills they wanted to share, which is why I think it's been as successful as it's been, even though it's only been a year.
So tell me how you define success and sort of where Skillshare really is. Have you received outside funding? I think you have, right?
Yeah. So one unique thing is, Malcolm and I came from the startup world. And when we first started the company, we had like a list of 150 ideas we wanted to do. We had a really hard time filtering them, and we started talking about what could we work on, for the next 5, 10, 30, 50 years of our lives, where we would really enjoy and felt that we made the world a better place. And for us, it was always been education, and that trimmed our list from 150 to 1. So because we came out of the startup industry, we were lucky and fortunate enough to raise money from investors that were investors in previous companies that we worked at, and really bet on us and our company and our vision and everyone that we hired, and all the teachers that teach, to really take this to the next level. So where we are today, just to give you some specific granular details, we launched Skillshare April of last year. Over the past year, we've grown probably like 10x. We're mostly in New York and San Francisco. We have thousands of teachers that have taught on the platform. We have thousands of students that go to classes every month. Next month, we're going to be expanding throughout the rest of the country and Canada. We're going to be releasing pretty much the online version of Skillshare, and not too shortly. And hopefully for us, our vision of what we want to do hasn't changed. If anything, it's just been evolving. So that's kind of where we are today.
So I really want this to be successful. I love the idea, but I also know that for every 20 ideas that get tried on the internet, you're lucky if one actually moves forward. So I was a little disappointed that you'd actually taken outside funding, because I worried that that becomes a trap, right? That it's difficult to maneuver, that there's an expectation of return at some point. And we're certainly watching a lot of companies get funded in the education space that don't seem to have a good revenue model. So how have you balanced that? And are your revenues getting to a place where you feel like you can project them to being self-sustaining, or are you going to face that inevitable sort of hurdle of how do you get profitable enough for the investments?
Yeah, I think we're very lucky to have investors, I guess that are very entrepreneurial friendly or vision friendly, meaning I think a lot of the horror stories you hear about, investors getting really involved in the company and really disrupting, the day-to-day. I don't think we really face a lot of those issues. They trust us 100%, and we're lucky to have investors that really back our vision and where we want to take it. As far as the business model behind Skillshare, it's really simple today. I think over time it could evolve, but we take a transaction fee on every ticket that gets sold. So if a ticket costs $10, we take a 15% fee from that. And I think as our community grows and we get more classes, our revenue will grow along with it. It's very similar to the business model that you'll see at Kickstarter. As far as the expectations, I think we really had a hard time in the early days, with where we wanted to take this. Should we keep it as something fun, something we do on the side, or just something that we really want to grow and spend the rest of our lives working on, or until either the company succeeds or fails? And we went with, if the bases are loaded, let's swing for the fences. And it really changes the mindset. I think most companies raise money so they could grow much faster than without it, and that's kind of the approach we're taking. So I don't think we would have grown as fast as we did without the money that we raised, or even put together the team that we did. But hopefully over the next couple of years, it allows us to grow much faster than we would have ever expected.
Are there hurdles for people who are doing this kind of teaching already to entering into Skillshare? Like, I did a search on parenting, and I can't remember exactly what I found, but it wasn't much. And I know a lot of parenting classes get taught. So are you finding that there are certain barriers to entry that you're going to have to help people overcome to be using Skillshare?
Yeah, I think, yes. Most people think, I think a lot of the barriers we're facing right now is just the fact that we're a new company. I think a lot of people will associate Skillshare with this company that's been around for years, and there's a certain expectation that they have when they hear about it. But we're just a little over a year old, and I think over the next year, a lot of those barriers that you mentioned will be fixed and overcome. If you think about companies like Yelp, that company's been around for 7 years. Meetup's been around for almost a decade. Kickstarter's been around for 3 to 4 years. Same thing with Airbnb. These communities and marketplaces take a little bit of time to build out, especially if you want to build it out the right way. Like I mentioned earlier, we are going to be offering a lot of classes, online in a hybrid format. And I think that'll allow us to scale and offer classes across the gamut.
Well, for what it's worth, I wasn't as familiar with Skillshare a week ago as I am now, having spent some time preparing for the interview. And I'm really anxious to try it, to see if I can actually hold a class and if people would come. I want to go back to the sort of the software and the education question, in part because of a lot of the funding and what might be an actual bubble right now in terms of educational technology and funding, but also because it seems as though some of the companies that have done best in the education arena didn't start out as educational programs, Ning or Evernote and the like. You're not really targeting traditional education, though, as a marketplace, right? So you fit in the kind of a different category. So sort of long term, if there is a desire to disrupt education, can you expand beyond kind of is it the hope that the lessons learned here would move to traditional education, or how would this impact traditional education?
Yeah, I think, since the beginning, we've always tried to complement traditional education, but never really, play in that sandbox. I think, for us, we're very focused on real-world applicable skills, the soft skills and hard skills. And, right now I think it'll take a long time to build, that side of the business out. And, there's a couple things we talk about a lot internally, when we think about the future. One of them being, how does this work with traditional education? And if anything, I think it will be very complementary. I think if there's something unique that works with Skillshare, whatever that is, I think there's a massive opportunity for that to really complement traditional education very well. And off the top of my head, there are a ton of ideas. There's new learning or teaching methodologies that come from our community that is proven to work, that they can apply. I think it's all the way down to if we have the biggest community of teachers and students in the world, we can convert any of those into real teachers at traditional institutions. I think it really spans the gamut of what it could look like. A lot of what we talked about in the early days is creating something that could work like this for the younger generation. I think that's where a lot of my personal interest lies, is creating some type of world where when I have kids or my future kids, they'll be able to enroll into an education that allows them to be creative and innovative. And for me personally, that's always been a personal mission to create something like that. So I guess just to wrap up, it's educating pretty much the creative class, or I think Seth Godin calls them the linchpins of the world. And I think that applies for any industry, any job, any interest, any skill. And the only way for that to work is if it's completely student-driven and bottom-up.
So I'm interested in that because it would feel to me like a lot of the intriguing student learning and student teaching that are taking place for free. So can you teach for free on Skillshare?
Yeah, you can teach for free on Skillshare. The price ranges anywhere from free to thousands of dollars. So the average price for classes is around $30, $35 per class in New York. And over the past year, our top student has taken over 70 classes on entrepreneurship and product design and programming for less than $2,500. It just shows you how affordable it is as well.
The question in the chat is, Skillshare classes are location-based. So currently they are all offline.
Yes.
You have plans for an online component, and mostly in New York and San Francisco, if I heard you correctly.
Yes, that's correct.
Have you talked to the people at Maker Faire at all? Is there synergy there?
Yeah, we've talked to a lot of similar, other companies that we just love. The Maker Faire community is one of them. We're huge fans of companies like Shapeways and MakerBot, and a lot of them do teach on Skillshare as well. So Shapeways is another company in New York. They teach a lot of classes on 3D printing. So we're starting to see our model get adopted by a lot of other similar companies and communities.
Is there an easy way to categorize where you're seeing the most activity?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of, so the way we've been growing Skillshare is, we'll pick certain communities that we really want to work with and bring onto Skillshare, and then we start developing curriculums for them. So the most activity you'll see is around entrepreneurship, technology, design, culinary arts, photography, advertising, illustration, filmmaking. I think over time, we'll start opening it up more and more and more. But right now on the platform, anyone could teach any skill anywhere, in the country. I guess at Skillshare, we're really not against any. We don't say you can't teach this, you can't teach that on Skillshare. We're pretty much open to anything.
So you started a company called Hot Potato, right? That got acquired by Facebook.
I didn't start. I joined. I was a very early employee there.
Interesting. Facebook acquires Hot Potato. Did Facebook shut it down?
Facebook acquired Hot Potato for the team, and they ended up working on some key features over at Facebook. So
I wonder how that's...
Yeah, it was more of a talent acquisition more than anything. Interesting.
I'm really curious to see how some of these activities in educational technology play out. Part of what I really like about Skillshare is it doesn't feel like you are marketing to the ed market, but it is an educationally centered product.
Yes,
so that's intriguing to me. Who else are you watching that's doing things that you feel are positively disruptive of education, where you're cheering them on as well as your own endeavors?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question because I always get, who do you think your competitors are? And it's such an odd question because, I think everyone listening and you and everyone that's, really wants to change education just kind of sees education as this massive problem and looking at all these companies trying to fix it and thinking it's tremendously awesome and amazing. I think education is very complex and we're going to need hundreds, if not thousands, of companies trying to innovate in different areas, trying to change it. So I'm actually a huge fan of a lot of companies that you've probably already seen or heard of. Off the internet, I do research and I'm a huge fan of non-traditional schooling. Some of my favorites include Hyper Island, which is a creative advertising school in Sweden. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in San Francisco and I heard of another school called Brightworks, which was like an elementary school around creativity and it's very project-based learning. So for me, I just have a natural admiration for companies and schools within the traditional space that are really trying different models. Let's say online, I'm a huge fan of Code Academy, another company I mentioned earlier. I really do love what, Udacity and Coursera is doing with traditional education online. I think it's amazing that 160,000 people enrolled into artificial intelligence course and got to learn something that we wouldn't have traditionally been able to learn. And I think that, there are going to be a lot more companies like this. I'm really excited to see, what happens. I think we're in a very unique time because this is probably one of the only times in the history of education that everyone around the world has questioned how it's run. And I think when people start questioning, the status quo, a lot of people start thinking about how they can fix it. And I think that's why you're seeing an explosion of startups and thinkers and writers and educators and academics and teachers and students trying a lot of different models. And I think a lot of people are very open to those new models. So I'm really excited to see what happens over the next 1 to 5 years.
I think, candidly, part of what makes your story more interesting to me than many is the degree to which you're thinking deeply about teaching and learning, and have expressed a willingness to not just come in and claim an ability to change things, but to learn as you go. And that actually was a part of why I liked the MIT-Harvard announcement on edX, because unlike Coursera and Udacity, it wasn't we're going to teach tens of thousands of people, but we want to actually figure out where the learning is taking place here. And you're almost uniquely kind of the opposite of a MOOC, right? You're not online, you're locally based, you're highly hands-on and relationship involved versus online with a lot less contact.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say the way, we view the world is, we always ask one question. I think I might have mentioned this earlier. If you could rebuild education from the ground up for the 21st century, what would that look like? And I think when you ask that question, the answers are all over the place, and they're all great solutions. And part of our company culture is trying to answer that question and build towards that future. So we look at education first, and then we start building our product and our website and our community and recruiting teachers from that. And to be completely honest, for one of the reasons we went offline first is, for the past 18 months, we've been researching different learning and teaching models nonstop. I think it's to the point where it's kind of a slight obsession of mine, and I feel like we are going to be moving into hybrid format, and within that hybrid format, we're going to be introducing, I wouldn't say it's an entirely new methodology of learning, but it's going to be completely different and unique based on our research within our own community, what's happening around the world. And to answer your earlier question, I think that's how our company innovates. Obviously, it's really cool and unique and special that teachers can, average people that never went to school can teach each other, but I think creating a methodology that actually works for the majority of people around skills they want to learn is going to be really, really tremendous. And that's kind of how we view the world and how we want to change it.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. If you have a question for Michael, I'm going to encourage you to raise your hand. That's the third icon over in the participant window. That's the raise hand. Monica, if you're still interested in talking, you can feel free to do that, or you can put a question in the chat. While we're waiting, Michael, when I was thinking about this interview, it occurred to me that Craigslist was sort of a great example of something that's been done for years and years and years, where online there was a significant change, almost kind of a printing press-like radical shift in how we do things as human beings. Is it your sense that that's going to take place in education as well, that we'll look back at this point in time and say this was a moment in the history of the world when everybody was willing to reshape their thinking?
I think so. One thing I found out in my research, the idea of, this concept of higher education is actually pretty new. There's a quote that I found in 1939 from President Roosevelt that said, just because a kid wants to go to college doesn't mean we need to finance it. And I think we're going to look back at what's happened over the past 20 years, and I think there's always going to be tremendous, benefits to traditional education or just education in general. But I think with the invention of the internet and the fact that everyone's more connected, there's going to be a new way of learning that's going to emerge, and it's going to work. I mean, I think 10, 20 years from now, we're going to look back and say, that was an amazing time in the world, and that thing got created, and that really shapes the way we learned. I think if you really think about it, I think the explosion in innovative solutions to a lot of educational problems really happened. This is very subjective in the past 2 years. Not saying that charter schools and people haven't been thinking about education, but I really think the mainstream attention to what's been happening really exploded in the past 2 years. And I think before that, probably the past previous 10 to 20 to 30 years, people have always been writing What are the problems with education and learning? How can it be fixed? And right now, we're starting to see a lot of people moving that into action. I think what we'll see in the next 5 to 10 years is some of those companies just working very, very, very well, and those being adopted and captured as best practices. And I think a great example is the Khan Academy, or Salman Khan, and the basic flip he did. And I think we'll start seeing a lot more things like that. And really, it's really fascinating.
Monica, you have mic privileges now. Oh, you've dropped down.
Okay.
If you're still there. Oh, good. Go ahead.
So, absolutely love what you're doing, and see that you're connected to Behance, or Behance, however you say it. I'd love to hear your thinking on that. It kind of relates to my question about the intention economy. So I just love to hear from someone who was a part of that, what their take is on that. Cool.
Could you just give me like a quick one or two liner about what attention, what the definition of attention economy or what he writes about?
Okay, so this is my take on it. Could be completely bonked, right? But the whole idea is that the web is now alluring, as opposed to sitting in a class and saying, here, you have to learn this. So the intention economy is now, we don't have to sell ourselves with credentials, because the web is helping us, like you said, you do something and then people would rather know that you did that. So the intention economy is really, you're aggregating possibly your own networked individualism, and then people would go to that mind map or that whatever you've created, and they could put in tag words and search you and find out if you know that. And I see a relation to Behance with that.
Yes.
So I'm curious what you think.
So for those of you that don't know, Behance was a company or startup I worked at a couple of years ago, and the mission of Behance was to organize a creative community. And what they mean by that is, they have like a website called the Behance Network, which is the LinkedIn for creative professionals. But Scott Belsky, the CEO and founder, spent years of his life researching the most productive creative people in the world, and documented how they actually made their ideas happen. So how does that tie into the attention economy? I think, in the future, a lot of what's going to happen is less saying or talking, or I think it's less about your resume and more about what you've made in the world. And I think people value things that get created, whether it worked or not, more than they do things that haven't. And to give a very granular example, next at Skillshare, and I know a lot of other companies do this as well, so we don't really ask for resumes anymore. For example, someone that applies for a programming job, we ask them for links to things they built. I know that's very specific for one position, but we also do that for other positions in our company as well. For someone that wants to, work on the community team, we ask them for articles they've written. We check their Twitter. I think basically the world is moving to a place where you can prove the things that you say that you can do, and I think that's how it really ties back into education.
So thanks for that, Monica. Janine wanted to know, Michael, what's the age range of people taking courses through Skillshare?
It ranges. I think, a couple of weeks ago we had a 10-year-old teaching a class in Vegas. Obviously his parents were there with him. But the sweet spot, I would say, of teachers and students it's probably 21 to 35. Right, I would say right now is the sweet spot. Obviously we have younger and older teachers and students. But I would say the majority of students are kind of, within that age range. And as we grow, I would love for for that to expand even more.
Good. So if you have a question for Michael, please feel free to put it in the chat or to raise your hand. We've got just a minute or two left. So I'm interested, Michael, in Khan Academy, because I feel like that may actually, for me, signal some of the danger areas that I see in the commercialization or the scaling of these solutions. There seems to be kind of a ready interest and adoption of Khan Academy that goes well beyond its actual value. How do you keep that balance? It sure feels as though you've kept kind of a balanced perspective on what you're doing. If you were to become as hugely popular as Saul Khan has, what would you try and make sure you didn't lose in that popularity?
Yes, I think I'm a huge fan of Khan and Salman Khan and the model that they've used, and I think that's going to be one of probably a dozen new models that evolve over the next couple of years. And I think we do apply a lot of best practices from the startup technology community, and one being talking to your users. So a really great example of that is when Twitter first came out, they never really institutionalized like the @ or the hashtag that we're using today. That was just something they saw thousands of their users just using that as part of their vernacular and how they use Twitter. And I think we've really adopted the same model. We never say to our community, this is the way you should learn. We kind of observe what's working, what's not, and taking those best practices and start piecing those pieces together and see what that looks like. And I think that bottom-up approach is how we're going to evolve our model over time as well.
So there's a question in the chat. What do you think are the biggest low-hanging fruit, untapped markets for Skillshare and growing in the next year or two?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the biggest untapped market for us is moving Skillshare online. I know we've talked about it a lot over the past hour. We didn't go into too much detail, but I do believe the best way to learn with technology is in a blended hybrid format, meaning students can learn online and they can also learn in person as well. So hopefully for us that will come out in the next couple of years. And let's say somebody, one of the Apple designers decides to teach a class. I think it would be amazing if thousands of people enrolled from all around the world, and when they finish the course, they actually could show what they created. I know we talked a lot about that for the past year or for the past hour, and hopefully we could create a model for that to really work on the internet. So I think that's going to be the biggest opportunity for us. Which is also what we're focused on right now as well.
Michael, I really appreciate your coming on the show. We end on time as a courtesy to our guests. Thanks for taking an hour. That's a lot of time. It's really appreciated. I have to say I'm really impressed.
Thank you.
Really hopeful for real success for you, and we'll look forward to seeing good things keep coming. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So coming up, our next show isn't until the 31st, David Dubel-Bice on social networking and professional development. Don't forget Connected Educators Month coming up in August. You'll hear lots more about that from me as we move forward. Thanks again to Michael. Thanks everybody for being here. Take care. Good night.